All right, welcome everybody to the latest Truth and Consequences Zoom chat. I'm joined today by Matt Glassman, Matt, glad to have you here, who I
Yeah.
consider one of the smarter DC analysts, understands Congress better than pretty much anyone else I know. So I'm really happy to have him here today to talk about mainly about the government, potential government shutdown. But I really want to talk first about I think of you as a pretty sober-minded person, somebody who is not prone to hysteria, who sort of I think has a sort of a level head about what's happening in the country, not really a partisan. So I need to ask you, I'm just curious, how afraid are you right now? And I mean that in all sincerity. Are you maybe afraid is the wrong word. How concerned are you right now with what's happening in this country?
I would say moderately concerned and more than I was at any point during Trump's first term. Um, I think that I'm not sort of like big picture concerned. Like, I don't ascribe to any belief that this is going to end in some sort of Putin or Orban situation where you just have, at best, sort of a liberal democracy or at worst, sort of a dictatorship. But I do think that the direction things are heading, even if and when the Democrats win back power, I'm not sure sort of like the pieces are ever going to be put back together into sort of a liberal consensus that we had in this country. And so even the best case scenarios I see are we are going into some sort of new constitutional order. And like that's not like the end of the world. Like that's happened many times in American history, right? Notably after the Jacksonian Revolution, after the Civil War, after the New Deal. Like it's just going to be a different arrangement of power, and there'll be winners and losers in that. And I think that it's very worrying to me to watch sort of the free speech stuff. It's plainly clear to me that Trump wishes he was Orban, if not Putin, and is more than happy to act on the premise that he is. Um, I do think when push comes to shove, we may look back at right now, like this summer, this early fall, as sort of the peak of all this. At least that's what I'm hoping optimistically. I think the Republicans are going to get absolutely destroyed in Virginia in November.
I think you're right.
And I think that might be a wake up call to a lot of people nationally, both in the center and on the center right, that like a wave is coming. I wouldn't shock me at all if the Republicans get destroyed in the 26 elections, either for Congress. And that's what needs to happen, right? Like that's sort of like how I think about a lot of this is that you can do what you want right now and you can argue about shutdowns and things, but the goal of anyone who wants sort of American politics to get back on some sort of rails needs to be that the Democrats need to absolutely destroy the Republicans in the 26th election. I think it's a fair chance they will.
I actually agree with you 100%. I really do think that the people talk about, the need for consensus, the need for some kind of a return to, some version of bipartisanship, and I think that's actually not what we need. I think we need for the Republican Party to be electorally destroyed to the point where it causes them to moderate their policies, or
Yeah.
moderate their positions. And I don't know that actually would happen.
Right.
But let me go a step further. Not just a question of moderating their policies. Democrats need to win election, and they need to wield power in the way that Republicans have wielded power, unabashedly. Right? I wrote this piece before the 2020 election, making the argument that Democrats, the first thing they should do when they get into office, if they win a trifecta, which they did, was to get rid of the filibuster, make DC and Puerto Rico states, expand the Supreme Court, and pass, legislation expanding voting rights. And my argument was this: is that you're not playing on a fair a ball field. You're basically the field is tilted against you, and unless you can wield power in that way. And by the way, none of those things would have been illegal. None of those. I mean, you making DC a state is actually arguably the small d Democratic thing to do.
Yeah.
But doing it, of course, would create four Senate seats for Democrats as well as a number of House seats. But the only way the Democrats could, you know, ensure that we don't go down the road we're going down right now was to use the political power they had, in an effect in that kind of way. Of course, they didn't do it, and even without Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, I don't know that you would have had a consensus to do that. But that's what needs to happen, because otherwise you're going to keep having these fights every 2 years, every 4 years, and you're going to have these threats from somebody like Trump coming into office. And you know, we've talked about this before, but I think what the thing about what's happened in the last 10 years that I think is so shocking is not so much what Trump has done, it's what Republicans have done to go along with it. And I think that's the part that is very difficult to get my head around. Um, to see, for example, this week with the same people who spent, I mean, JD Vance in February was complaining about, you know, it was chastising the Europeans for hate speech and for infringing on free speech rights, which they're now doing right here in the United States. I mean, the lack of any kind of ethical core, the situational ethics of these people is just mind-boggling. I've never seen like it before in my life.
Yeah, I agree that um electoral defeat is what really needs to happen right now to sort of Trumpism. I'm a little more optimistic than you, in part because I think Trump is going to be old news at some point, right?
Yes.
You know, the 28th election will happen, there'll be new leaders. He will eventually not be in politics either because he passed away or he just recedes from it. And in the wake of Trump, I'm not sure what happens to sort of his coalition. It has no sort of underlying sort of policy coherence. It really is built around a cult of personality. And I'm not sure anyone else can just pick those pieces up. I don't think JD Vance can, for instance. And I think that means that sort of whatever strength that coalition currently has will be much less sort of down the road. And that makes me optimistic that, you know, there can be sort of a return to American politics that lives under some sort of liberal consensus of sorts. I don't think, for instance, that immigration as an issue is going away. I think globally has risen as sort of a piece of the right, and you're going to have sort of right-wing parties that aren't necessarily populist in total, but sort of have picked up this immigration issue effectively, and so that's going to be a piece of it. But that doesn't mean your right-wing party has to also simultaneously be sort of trying to attack the press, right, and attack voting rights, attack other basic sort of freedoms. I actually think that one area that also gives me optimism. It's going to be quite clear soon, I think, that expanded voting rights actually are going to help Republicans more than Democrats.
Yeah.
It's already sort of like on the docket in the minds of academics and people who study elections, but neither party seems to have really realized this yet. And when they do, that's going to make a big difference because the party that nominally sort of intellectually supports expanding the franchise has been the Democrats.
Right.
But you may see people sort of gently flip on this, and that will be sort of a counter force to some of the more illiberal tendencies of the right, I think, that they see expanding the vote as potentially electorally beneficial. And it's hard to even picture that given the last couple generations, right?
But I want to pick up a piece of something you just said, because I think it's really important. I think the most slept on story in American politics right now is the coming crack up of the Republican coalition, the Trump sort of MAGA coalition. And it's funny, I wrote this piece for the newsletter a few weeks ago, and it's funny, I pitched it to a few places, outlets. I'm like, this is a really important story no one's talking about. And everyone was kind of like, I don't really see it. Like all these editors are like, no, I don't really see it. And I get it. It's hard to sort of see it now, but the problem that Republicans have is they have a cult of personality leader, and they don't have an obvious replacement for him. And here's the example that I like to use about this. Um, a year ago, Trump was almost assassinated, and try to imagine for a second if that shot had killed him. Who do you think would have replaced? This is before Vance was picked as VP. Who would have
Yeah.
replaced Trump on the ticket?
I really don't know. I mean,
And
it would
I
have
don't
been
know either. And I've asked the question to a lot of
a
people, and
complete
nobody has a good answer
dogfight,
for me.
right?
Because, I mean, you could say DeSantis, you could say Nikki Haley, but those are people who did not have a great deal of support within
There are
within
people
the
who are
party.
extremely divergent in policy beliefs
E-
and style, right? Like it's
Exactly. And my point was that like the lack of a clear uh, uh, replacement for Trump is a real problem because there was two things here. First of all, there's nobody who I think can uh, unite the party. There's nobody who can motivate the occasional voters who the Trump has. I mean, Trump won in large measure in 2024 and 2016 to some extent because he brought out voters who don't usually cast ballots. And it's point all the time in four states that he won, the four swing states he won, Democratic Senate candidates won: Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, and Wisconsin. And in some cases, Harris got more votes than some of those Democratic candidates. But what happened is that the Republican candidates just got less votes than Trump. So you had a small but important segment of the electorate that basically voted for Trump and nobody else. Now, do those voters come out in 4 years if JD Vance is on the ticket or somebody else is on the ticket? I'm not convinced of that. And I think beyond that, uh, you know, because there's no Trump, I think you're going to see people trying to replace Trump. It's going to lead to actually even more extreme politicians, people who think they can out Trump Trump. And so, and the final thing I think is like when he's not on the ticket, since 2016, Republicans have struggled, right? They lost in 2018. I mean, I would argue, almost slightly overperformed in 2020, in part because Trump was on the ticket. 2022, they badly underperformed in an election. They should have walloped the Democrats. So I think that this is a real problem for them. And I don't
Yeah,
think anyone's sort of realizing that they have much bigger long-term issues than actually Democrats do in some
yeah,
respects.
I agree with that. I do think that, you know, obviously, like Trump produces huge counter reactions, and so we're seeing sort of, I think, a rising tide among a lot of Democrats of wanting to fight and be progressive and be tough tactically in ways that are going to be make sort of center left Dem types like me or neoliberals like me upset, because I would love it if the Democrats won the 28 election with someone who looked like Obama, but I think they're going to win the 28 election with someone who looks potentially a far more left figure than that, and even a left figure who has sort of also disagreements with this, the core of sort of the liberal consensus too. I do worry that what we've built here is sort of a populist right and an increasing sort of like potentially socialist left that has fundamental disagreements with sort of the traditional liberal center of Western thought. Now, it's not nearly as concerning to me on the left right now, and there's still a healthy debate in the Democratic Party. But like, there are European parties on the left that I don't want to see sort of develop a lot of power here either. And there's plenty of sort of authoritarian types that can rise on that side of the equation too. I don't see that coming right now, but it's a concern of mine that what Trump has set off is sort of a tit for tat race. Um, and that's not great if you're a Republican too. Like, I would be very nervous about like
Yeah,
Trump's sort of use of executive power and sort of crumbling of the rule of law if you don't complete that project in time, right? And like all of a sudden AOC's president. Like,
I
I can
agree.
see why it make you nervous if you're on the
But
center right for sure.
I'm going to push back a little on what you said because I think that the interesting thing about the Democratic coalition is that it hasn't gotten as liberal as I would have expected it. And I think we can wait and see what happens in some of the primaries if liberal candidates actually do well. But
Yeah.
I think what seems to be interesting is that the core Democratic Party, I mean, look, we can say the key constituency, I think, is generally speaking, black voters, black women voters tend to be the most important. But I think by volume, the biggest constituency, maybe most important, is white suburban women. That's become a dominant constituency within the Democratic Party. And that is a constituency that I think of as being far more pragmatic and in some ways less ideological than where the parties. Now, I live in New York, so we're about to elect a socialist, inexperienced socialist as our mayor, which I'm not too thrilled about. But I don't know that that represents the direction of the Democratic Party. And I would just say, for the record, as somebody who's lived here for 25 years, I've never had a Democratic candidate I've ever voted for that I liked as for mayor. Literally, never one. And this election is no different in that was forced to cast a ballot for Andrew Cuomo, even though I can't stand Andrew Cuomo. And I don't know that Mamdani would have won if not for the fact that Cuomo was on the ticket. But that's neither here nor there. I think the larger point here is that I think Democrats are more inclined toward pragmatism than they
Yeah.
are toward ideology. And I
And
think yeah,
they'll be boxed into it too. I mean, you can, there's sort of like these notions that like, well, what happens when a Democrat gets a presidency, declares a national emergency, starts doing whatever the hell they want on, this, that, or whatever. And like, the easy balance of that is that the Supreme Court will just strike all those things down in a way
right.
they might not with Trump. So there's much less sort of that authoritarian runaway rule of lawlessness under a liberal right now, simply because the court is going to be a balance for those things in the way it's sort of an enabler for Trump right now.
But the last thing I'll say, and do want to get to the shutdown, but the last point I want to make here is just that I wrote a piece yesterday about this, and I think maybe you can appreciate this, that one of the things that's happened with Trump is that we've just seen these basic norms that we came to, I think you and I grew up with and came to understand as being part of politics. They just disappeared. And I was just, writing this about Brendan Carr, the head of the FCC, just completely politicizing an agency that has long been independent, long been nonpartisan. And I found this quote from Ajit Pai, who was the FCC head, who was appointed by Trump, basically saying, coming out against the idea of networks losing their license because they say things that are critical to the president, and pledging, not pledging, but sort of promoting the idea of the FCC being independent. And that idea has been thrown completely out the window with Brendan Carr. And it's just one more of these norms that has just been destroyed by this president. Not to mention the fact that there's a story today that Trump is about to fire the prosecutor from Eastern Virginia, the federal prosecutor, because he won't indict Letitia James. And he's now
Yeah.
looking to fire and put somebody in his place who will indict Letitia James, even though there doesn't seem to be evidence that she's committed a crime. I mean, can you imagine that story, like in any other scenario, not leading to the impeachment of the president? I mean, it's just an insane situation.
So you and I are roughly the same age, and I think that having grown up in the sort of post Watergate consensus about this stuff, it really is remarkable. And obviously, neither of us can remember the 60s or the 30s or the 19th century, but like there was a post Watergate consensus about sort of the independence and the non-politicization of the agencies that came directly sprung from sort of the excesses of the Johnson administration and then of course the major excesses of the Nixon administration.
Right.
And that consensus felt to me like something that would probably hold forever. Right. And if like Bill
Yeah.
Clinton whispers something to someone on a tarmac, the world goes crazy and rightfully so, perhaps. Right. And if George
Right.
Bush does similar things, you're like, what the hell is going on here? He fires attorneys. And now with Trump, it just doesn't even seem like anyone cares. The basic politicization of the Justice Department to me is like unbelievably striking and obvious and like sort of out in the open now,
I
almost
know.
to the point where I'm not sure I would expect the next president to sort of backtrack on it, right? Which is even scarier in some ways. It is a weird norm to break because it was one of the most solid norms, I think, of the 80s or 90s or
Absolutely.
even 2000s. Yeah.
I mean, I think we talked, we were like, there was examples of this during the Bush years about politicization, but they were nothing compared to what we're seeing right now. And for a president, and for ABC to run the story of saying that he's going to fire this person because they wouldn't prosecute T. James. I mean, it's not being portrayed. Your hair should be on fire about this. This is a slam dunk example of abuse of presidential power. I can't think of a more obvious example. This is about 1,000, 10,000, a million times worse than anything Nixon tried to do during Watergate. I mean, to literally fire a prosecutor because he won't indict a political rival without evidence.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's and yet it seems so pedestrian in the world of Trump too, right? Like
I know.
it's not, you look at that, you're like, well, okay. It doesn't surprise me at all, I guess is how I would say
It
it.
doesn't surprise
And
me.
I mean, the saving grace of Trump is that I really do think he wishes he was Orban, but like Orban's a lot more popular than Trump, right? Like
Yeah, it's
Trump's
true.
big problem here is that he's just not popular, and the people who have been able to consolidate sort of authoritarian power have generally been popular. And that missing ingredient, I think, is a problem. Is a problem for Trump. Is that there's plenty of people who are just plain skeptical of the dude as a baseline, and he's never been able to capture sort of the popularity that Orban has or that Putin had, during his transition from pseudo democracy leader to sort of entrenched dictator, right?
Right. No, I agree with you. I agree 100%. And that's a huge point that people need to pay attention to. Trump is not a popular president. His policies are not popular. And frankly, this going after Jimmy Kimmel is not a popular move. It's not going to play well. I think
Yeah.
you're already seeing polls that suggest that it's not going to help him. There's a reason why he's
It's
never.
also like it's
Go ahead.
also like a classic bad move. Like forget anything about the substance that it unites the other party and divides yours. Like getting into that problem, Karl Rove writing op-eds about this, right? And like you
Right.
just see the coalition of against Trump on this particular issue expanding, and people are like, "Well, what comes of that?" Well, what comes of that is the president isn't popular, and that has downstream consequences for people willing to stand up against him and just for losing elections.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
I
So
agree.
should we talk about shutdown?
Let's talk about shutdown. And I want to read you
Yeah.
something from Ezra Klein's piece he wrote last week, which has been apparently circulating among the Senate Democratic caucus. He says the case for a shutdown is this: a shutdown is a attentional event. It's an effort to turn the diffuse crisis of Trump's corrupting of the government into an acute crisis that the media, that the public will actually pay attention to. Is Ezra correct about this?
No, I think that part of it is just completely backwards.
Yeah.
If your idea is that we're going to do something people don't like in order to draw attention to something we think they're not paying attention to, it's like really sort of you've lost me. Like people don't like Trump. They know about Trump. Like raising the stakes by lighting something on fire, right, in order to get people's attention just seems to me fundamentally incorrect.
Yes.
Um, and 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 this attentional thing, because Ezra has this whole theory of attention, that it's the important commodity in politics right now. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But like creating attention on yourself by doing something people aren't going to like and are going to feel pain from is just sort of not the attention you want. And again, like you won't win this. I mean, I think that's the bottom line that people are missing is that you don't win trying to leverage a shutdown to achieve policy goals. No one ever has, and
Can
I
you
can't
point
see
to
how
me to
any.
the example of the one time that creating a shutdown worked as a leverage play?
I can't. I mean, do you have an example?
Right. It doesn't exist, does it?
I mean, people will claim that they'll try and elide the point by saying threatening a shutdown got you a better bargaining result in the brinksmanship. And then that I can see, right? Like if you actually fight it out to the end, sometimes they people will sort of give in on little things. And I don't doubt that that's what the Democrats should be doing right now. Is like you play the brinksmanship, try and get those gettable Republicans to agree with you about the ACA subsidies, right? Or about, some language that, nullifies pocket rescissions or something. Those are gettable things. But in the end, the minute you shut the government down, everything switches from those substantive issues to
Absolutely.
whether you should have shut the government down.
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden you unify the opposition against the shutdown and you're just standing there having caused the shutdown and they dig in against you and you lose. I don't mean to sort of like give it sort of the laugh off, but it doesn't pass the smell test.
It
And what it
doesn't.
feels like to me,
I agree with you, and I haven't heard a single argument that I have found. I mean, look, the argument that I find, I guess, the most persuasive, although I don't really find it persuasive, is that Trump is breaking the law. Trump is corrupt. Trump is an authoritarian, which I all the points I agree with. And this doesn't. You can't have business as usual, and you have to sort of draw a line in the sand and say we're going to hold the line against what he wants to accomplish. And I like all those arguments. The problem is there's no evidence that a shutdown will actually stop him from what he's doing.
right. I mean, this is the difference between sort of assessing a situation and then choosing the correct strategic path. And your job is not necessarily to choose the best path. Sometimes it's to choose the least worst path.
Yes.
And if you have all negative choices, you still have to choose the one that is least worst. And best I can tell, doing a shutdown is way worse than doing nothing in my mind. Way worse. I mean, people, if I told you, well, the answer to Trump is to start lighting things on fire in DC, you'd be like, well, that's ridiculous, right? But I'd be like, well, you have to do something. Why not do something extravagant, get attention? And you'd be like, well, no, people will just turn against you. Like that is what a shutdown is in some sort of less dramatic sense. And I think the Democrats, like, you also have to like I see here some Democrats talking about, well, shutdown's symbolic. It'll create a huge
Yes.
thing that people will see. It also will hurt people, right? Like it's
Yes.
bad policy too.
Yes.
And there'll be people who have to go without paychecks. There'll be services the federal government provides that sort of don't happen for a period of time. And and that's not good, right? And if that is the pawns you need to play in order to raise the stakes for attention, that probably won't work. In my mind, definitely won't work. It's a high price. I also think tactically the Democrats are completely underestimating what happens when you're on their side of the shutdown because they've never been on that side. They've always been on the other side,
So
basically.
that's the other point I think is really important. They've never done a shutdown before like this. And we also had a shutdown in which the party shutting down the government has controls neither the House or the Senate. Right. So to actually orchestrate a shutdown, you have to filibuster an appropriations bill. And once you do that, you have lost all control because Republicans can bring anything they want to the floor. You can't end the shutdown. I mean, you could end the filibuster, I suppose, end the shutdown, but Republicans don't have to go along with it. And Republicans have complete control to bring poison pill legislation to the floor. They can bring a bill that says we're gonna fund the border security and dare Democrats to vote against that. They could bring a bill that basically meets the Democrats' demands, but also has DoD funding and border security funding but leaves out funding for the EPA or for Department of Labor. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that Republicans can screw Democrats on this that are not being considered. And once you get to the point of a shutdown, you've basically surrendered your leverage, oddly enough. You really, in this situation, you have no way to stop what Republicans are going to do.
Yeah, and this is sort of the structural point that I try to make is that you're on your worst footing when you're causing the shutdown by a filibuster. One, for all the reasons you lay out, which is that you don't have control over either chamber, so you can be forced to become over and over again the reason the shutdown isn't ending.
Yes.
But the second point is that from a public opinion point of view, using the filibuster when the president doesn't want to shut down, the House doesn't want to shut down, and a majority of the Senate doesn't want to shut down, including probably at least one person in your party right out the gate, is going to be a terrible PR nightmare. I also worry about the tactics the executive branch will use because in any shutdown, the president has some discretion about what closes and what opens
Yeah,
and
that's
how they
right.
highlight it. And Obama used this sort of magnificently in 2013. If the president likes the shutdown, like Trump in 2018, he can keep a lot of things running normally. If the president is against the shutdown, like Obama was, he just immediately closed the Washington Monument, closed the national parks, pissed off every tourist in the country who a year
Right.
ago booked their vacation to Zion and now they can't go. Well, what happened? The Democrats are filibustering the Senate. What?
Right.
Right? And I think Trump might even go further than that. Right? You can do stuff that's really nasty. Right? Just use a skeleton crew for TSA. Slow the airport lines down to nothing. Right? Why? Well, the Democrats shut down the government, and now you're gonna have to wait in line in the airport for 3 hours. It's just like
And
it
look,
really sort of.
I think the thing is, it's not guaranteed to me that people won't blame Trump for this. They probably will. But I don't know that it moves the needle in any significant way against Trump. I think what it does, to your point you made earlier, it unifies the Republican Party and it puts Democrats on the defensive. It also, to make Ezra's attention point, it takes attention away from all the things that are liabilities for Trump. I mean, I can't make this point enough. He is an unpopular president. Okay, he was in the what mid he was above 50%, which he'd never been in his first term when he took office. Those numbers have really cratered. He's moved about 10 or 20 points. That goes both directions. He's now about 42, 44% approval rating. That's probably where his baseline is because of his support among MAGA Republicans. But that's a baseline that will probably lead to Republicans losing the House in 2026. So I guess I don't really see how this how this helps you. I just think it just draws attention away from the things you want to focus on.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I would be in a much more sort of bind if I thought like a shutdown was like potentially a good political strategy, even though it's bad policy. But like this is an easy call to me. Like it's just a bad strategy. And this has nothing to do with the assessment of Trump. He's a lunatic and he's president and he's doing awful things. But like how you deal with a lunatic who's president who's doing awful things is you take the best course of action to politically defeat him. And a shutdown just doesn't fall. Now, I mean, if you go into a shutdown like Schumer is without a plan of how to get out of it, like you're really up a creek. And I mean, you have to figure out how it's going to end. And usually it means you're going to crawl back to the table and take some awful face saving deal. And your public opinion is going to be really lower and you're going to have unified the other party. That's going to be how you come out of it.
So I want
And
to read you something else that Ezra wrote because I read this and I read it like 3 times. I was so gobsmacked by it, and I think Ezra's he's a smart guy, but this was such a ludicrous argument that I really had to like I couldn't believe he made it. But this is what he says: I'm not certain Democrats can win a shutdown. I'm not certain they have the leaders that they need. It is absolutely the case that Democrats could lose a shutdown, but whatever they're doing right now, it's not called winning. What kind of argument is that? Like this reminds me of
no,
maybe my favorite line ever from The Simpsons. When Homer goes back to school because he needs to take a class in nuclear physics, and he doesn't spend the whole semester not studying. And Lisa asks him, what are you going to do to pass your final? And he's like, I'm going to crawl under a pile of coats and hope everything works out for the best. And that's like the Homer Simpson strategy, but that's what Ezra is suggesting. It's a
yeah,
strategy of you shut down the government and then you know, hopefully things work out because what you're doing now is not working. The thing I would argue with also is that what they're doing now, he says, is not it's not called winning. I don't really agree with that. Right? I mean, if it's not called winning, why are Democrats leading in the generic ballot? Why are they continuing to win special elections? Why are they likely to swamp Republicans in New Jersey and Virginia? Why is Trump so unpopular? That's not because I think
So
Democrats are doing in the House, but it's
yeah,
because the general mood of the country has turned against Trump. That's what's
I
happening.
so I think two things are going on here. One is that, and this is not a trap I usually find people like Ezra falling into, is that there's this idea, from the president's review, we just call it like Green Lanternism, that if the
Yes,
president
the do
was just
something
trying
argument.
harder,
Yes,
if we were just trying harder, if we just cared more, we could win. And it's just not how politics works, right?
no,
There's no magic sauce that can make you stop the ICE raids right now. There just isn't,
there isn't.
right? And the Democrats don't have enough power to force things to happen. And so people say, well, what can you do? Well, you can go cause a shutdown. Yes, but like if that's doing something for the sake of doing you have to assess whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. Now, all that said, there is one piece of this that I think we need to talk about because it does come into play, and that is the coalition management. And that
Yeah, I
is,
wanted to get to that point. This before let me just preview
yeah,
this point. I think this is the most persuasive argument for why you do a shutdown. And basically the argument is that Democrats around the country are pissed off, and they want to see blood coming out of the hands of Democrats trying to resist Trump. And if they give in again, as Schumer gave in March, they run the risk of just so pissing off their own base that it could have an impact in midterms next year.
yeah. I mean, I think that coalition management argument is the one that makes some sort of sense because we live in a democracy where parties are vital and you have to have your party sort of at full strength. And if your party ruptures and cracks apart, you are going to suffer consequences. And, you know, I don't actually think on the merits that would happen. Like the Democratic base would sort of abandon the Democrats because they
I don't
refuse
believe
to
that
play
either.
hardball here. I don't even think sort of like the appropriations bills or the rescissions or any of that is what's animating Democrats relative to say the ICE raids or
Agreed.
Medicaid cuts or things like or the tariffs, right? Like I don't think this is the top issue, but I do think from Schumer's point of view, there's a secondary subset of this which may distort sort of how they behave, which is leaders in the Senate have to keep their caucus together if they want to remain leaders. It's the John Boehner problem. And even if Schumer thinks a shutdown is bad for the party, he may see it as the only way to save his own hide as leader. And that's not great, but that is how sort of caucus politics works, right? If
Right.
a huge faction of the Senate Democrats want a shutdown, you kind of have to give it to them, or they'll get a leader who will give it to them. And any they say he burned them in March. Some of the liberals say that. I don't think that's quite right, but they definitely feel aggrieved from how he dealt
Well,
with in March in the
what
context
he
of
did in
him.
March, well, I thought was, and people, I wrote this piece at the time, and I was calling for a shutdown, but I sort of came around to the view that I was wrong about this, and the shutdown was a bad idea, because I think he took a bullet for his caucus. I think his caucus didn't want to do a shutdown because they knew that it was going to be a disaster, and so he basically was the one who kind of went out publicly and said, made clear that he wasn't going to go along with this. I think that was a courageous move on his part, and one that he did in order to. That's what a caucus leader does. They take the arrows and the bullets for the rest of their caucus. But I think it's deeper than just a Senate caucus. I think it's a party management thing where, like, Schumer and the Jeffries and the leadership is sort of seen as the leaders of the party right now, and the party wants them to resist Trump, and so it's very hard for them not to do that. But I think, look, there's a reason why Pritzker and to some extent Shapiro and definitely Gavin Newsom have become the most popular Democrats in the country because they're not in Congress and they have power and they can do things to resist Trump.
Yeah.
And that is why they are getting support. And if you're a Democrat in the Senate looking at that and you look at what happened to Newsom, who has turned his prospects around in just a few months, but this whole redistricting thing, it's very hard to look at that and say, that isn't the way, that's the way I need to go if I want to build support within the party. And that I think is what's driving this shutdown fever on Capitol Hill, this belief that we have to do something. But I'm telling you right now, if they do it, they're going to end up Democrats are going to end up being more pissed off, I think, than if they don't do it. Because what's going to end up happening? They're not going to get what they want. They're going to have to crumble, and they're going to have to give in to Trump, and they're going to have to go along with reopening the government, and people are going to be even more pissed off at the Democrats for this. I don't. This is a lose lose I
Yeah,
know they
no,
think they're going to win by doing something. They're more likely not going to lose.
I agree, and I mean I still think they may not do this, particularly not now in September. But I think there's a I think I thought they were going to find a way out of this, but I don't think they are now. I think there will be some sort of Democratic-led shutdown either now here in September or at the end of the 7 weeks or whatever the CR they do agree to now would be in November. And I do think it's going to be driven by sort of these coalitional pressures to do it, which is, I mean, people have different preferences in the party, right? And like,
Right.
I could be wrong. And so you have to sort of go with it sometimes, but Chuck Schumer is going to do it with a smile on his face. He'll be a warrior if it happens, but I don't actually even think Schumer thinks this is a good idea.
No, I
Um,
don't. And I will say this to your earlier point. I think this is maybe the end of Chuck Schumer's leadership as the head of the Senate Democrats. I just don't think he can survive this either way. Even if he does go along with the shutdown, I think um, people will say he's not tough enough to stand up to Trump. And look, I mean, he's trying to sound tough right now, but I just think that he's in a no-win situation. We have a question here that I think is a good one from Carl Cummings. Says, what does it mean to keep a bill? What does it mean to pass a bill to keep government open if Trump continues to ignore congressional directives? Republicans won't hold him to them. I mean, what it means is that Trump will continue to break the law, and there's really nothing that can be done about it. I mean, I don't mean to be flippant, Carl, but that's the basic answer to your question.
so my, I've thought about this a lot, and I do think there's a difference between Trump behaving the way he does and say congressional Republicans acting in bad faith and cutting bargains with like the express purpose of knowing Trump will undo them. And I don't think that's happening, right? Like I think when we get to the omnibus here, Chair Collins and Tom Cole will be bargaining in good faith, and you will get a bipartisan omnibus of the traditional style you get, and Trump will undo some of it. But that divides the Republican coalition. A ton of the Republicans, the appropriations leaders, don't like what Trump's doing. They're against the rescissions, particularly the pocket rescissions. The moderates are not happy with the administration, and a lot of backbench Republicans, are sort of pleading with the administration not to cut the programs they like, right?
Right.
And so that is dividing the other party. And I do think, from the Democratic point of view, two things about this. One is if you just bargain in good faith like that and negotiate, then you can call out Trump when he cuts the stuff. The alternative is to say, we are going to do something nobody's going to like, and we will lose him politically in order to prevent him from doing something hypothetical right down the road. And I think it's a much tougher argument.
Well,
That
yeah,
said,
go ahead.
if the Democrats want to do something here, if they want to make a positive move, the move I would make, if they don't want to be passive, is they could withdraw from the appropriations process and just say, you own the government. We won't filibuster. Write your partisan bills. Let's see what you come up with when you have carte blanche to write these bills. That is a strategy that elevates the stakes without sort of, in my mind, automatically losing, right? Because the Republicans, left to their own device to write the bills, will move those bills in some direction conservative. There'll be a lot less movement than you might think. And it would give the Democrats a clear distinction between what they want and what actually gets written. Um, isn't great. Like people don't want to see that sort of power, but it's an option. You can withdraw from the process.
Well, I think the other thing about Carl, your question, but anybody else have any questions, please put them in the chat. I think one other point here is that Republicans are not up to this point, like they've complained about the rescissions, but they also went along with the one that they passed a couple of weeks ago, right? I mean, they're going to whine about it and talk and say, but they're not going to do anything, at least until, primary deadlines are over. They're not going to really push back on Trump. And this is part of the problem we're dealing with when I get back to this question about norms. You know, the in a normal political environment, it's Republicans who would say to Trump, "You can't do these things, right? You can't infringe on free speech. You can't send ICE agents out without unmarked vehicles and face masks on and take people and disappear them. You can't do that." But they're not going to do that. They're not going to stop anything that he wants to do. And so, with that in mind, it gives Democrats very little power to actually stop the thing Trump is doing. I mean, even something like the Epstein stuff, which has been an embarrassment for the administration, they can't even get a vote on that in the House. And I think the Epstein thing, I think Democrats have gone way too far on the Epstein stuff, and I don't think it's that effective politically. But I mean, even that they can't get even the Senate couldn't get Lisa Murkowski to go along with it, a vote on that. The Republicans are not going to turn against Trump. They're just not. I mean, certainly not until again primary deadlines end, and even then, I'm not so sure. And because of that, it leaves Democrats with very few options, if any, to stop Trump, at least in Congress. And that's just the reality. And I know people don't want to hear that. I know Democrats don't want to hear that. I mean, but that's the reality of the situation. And look, you look at these polls that show Democrats have unfavorability ratings that are, the lowest in like 30 years. And I don't even take that very seriously at all because in the end of the day, you don't see that playing out in local elections. You don't see it playing on special elections. You don't see it's not going to play out that way in Virginia and New Jersey. A lot of that is people, Democrats who are pissed off at Democrats because they want to see them do more, but there's really nothing they can do. I mean,
Yeah.
this is
I
by the way, a failure of civic education in this country that people don't understand that.
yeah, I also think that there's some people who have argued to me that the Democrats need to take on sort of a higher strategy. They need to increase the variance because things are just going the wrong direction for them. And I fundamentally disagree with that, sort of like in sort of like a medium term political sense. I mean, we've already said this, but like the Democrats are poised to do well in
Yes.
upcoming elections, both the off-year elections in Virginia, New Jersey, but then in next year's federal elections. And the idea that they're the ones who need sort of a risky strategy right now doesn't make any sense to me. There's a combination of an unpopular president with unpopular policies and the basic thermostatic nature of American politics, which
Yes.
is the president's party overextend itself and gets crushed in the midterm elections, right? Like if we knew nothing else about what was going on, our assumption would be the Democrats would easily retake the House
Yes.
next fall. And I expect it to happen. And I expect the Democrats to have the House in 2027. And that will give them a much firmer footing to battle with the Trump administration. Yeah,
Yeah, and keep in mind, like 2022, look, 2022, Republicans underperformed in large measure because they had terrible candidates. They lost a lot of winnable Senate seats and winning gubernatorial races. They still took the House. They still did win the House, even with an underperformance. And I don't really know my assumption that'll happen again this time as well. I mean, death taxes and the incumbent party gets swamped in the first midterm election. I mean, it's been true pretty much every election except for one in 2002. I mean, since the 30s. So I just really don't see that this is going to be very different. And it's like this old line about if your enemy is digging a hole, don't stop them. And that's what Republicans are doing. And by the way, to that point, I just want to make one. This is the most cynical thing that I will say on this maybe this week, but like, or maybe ever. But the big thing that Democrats are focusing on is trying to stop these subsidies from being cut, Obamacare subsidies from being cut, and because they don't want to see people's healthcare premiums go up. What are you doing? What better way to get back into political power than raise healthcare premiums on 20 million people? This is the problem with the party has an ethical core, right? That they can't they want to help people. But you're politically, I'm telling you right now, this is if I were Republicans, I would say, fine, we'll take the deal. We'll extend the subsidies for Obamacare because you know what? That solves the political problem for them. It really does.
yeah, and I mean this is sort of a classic. This is nothing new for parties, choosing whether you want a policy or an issue. And this has come up over and over
Right.
again. Whether it's the Republican Party in the 1850s or whether it's the Democrats trying to figure out whether they want to go with the Lee Rubio child tax credit in 2017, right? Like you have to decide whether you want to, maybe help out the opposition and get something good in a bill, or just let them sort of hang themselves by, saving the issue for the election. And I don't sort of like from a moral point of view, it's very difficult to sort of like I don't envy any leader has to make these choices about helping people versus setting up issues, but it's something parties have to think about very clearly. And I do not blame them one bit when they choose issues over policies. And even when they sort of sacrifice their own constituents to create the issue, as which is exactly what you're talking about now in theory.
Look, I rely. I receive Obamacare. I'm on Obamacare. I don't want to see them cut the subsidies, but at the same time, it's like from a political standpoint. I mean, that would be better for the Democrats. But of course, look, this is Republicans wouldn't think twice about this. They would just sort of let people suffer so would help them politically. And they've done that in the past to great effect, by the way. They did in 2010. They did in 2014. They want to undermine the economy because it helps them. Democrats don't think that way. But look, at the end of the day, I think I get all of the arguments for a shutdown. But I think they're largely emotional arguments. They are, we have to do something. And I used to write this, when I wrote more on foreign policy, like the do something creed, which was basically like something bad's happening in the world. We have to do something. I don't know
Right.
what. We have to do something to stop it, right? And
Yeah.
often that would get us into trouble when we wanted to do something. And
Right.
that's what's happening now. The Democrats are falling guilty to sort of do something ism. And I get it, but like as we've discussed, there's just really no way to play this out where it works well for the party.
Yeah. I mean, no one likes taking sort of passive, meek moves, but often they're the right course. Sometimes you have to fold in poker, and and play the next hand. And this is a spot where like trying to get aggressive to satisfy some sort of internal anger or feeling of helplessness is just not thinking it through clearly, in my view.
Right.
And I don't, and like, I not, this isn't like some sort of hypothetical. Like we've watched shutdown after shutdown where Democrats have been on the other side of it and have basically been laughing laughing in their offices at how the Republicans have ran themselves into this grounding, right? And that is exactly what's going to happen now. John
Exactly, man.
Thune and the Republican senators are going to be behind the door in the majority leader's office, literally laughing that Schumer found the way to get them into this box canyon they can't get out of, right?
Yeah.
And Trump is going to be a pagan shit running around on TV talking about. I can't. I am the thing I am looking forward to least in all this is the carnival barker way Trump is going to sort of grandstand this, and like it's what I would do if I was in his position, opposing sort of a crazy shutdown sort of political move.
Yeah, Ron, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry that you're getting followed around the world by Trump. Yeah, it is a difficult situation. And look, you know, it's funny. I was thinking about this morning. Like, I wonder if my view of this changed because of what happened with the Jimmy Kimmel situation, which I find so egregious and does like just make me sort of say we got to do something. But again, as I think we've discussed, it's hard. Don't get out of Trump's way, I guess is the bottom line. I
Yeah.
think, like I said, I think when the polling comes out on this Jimmy Kimmel movie, it's going to be deeply, deeply unpopular, and it's going to be
I
the kind of thing that might play in MAGA world, although I'm curious to see what the polling shows. It's not going to play with independents. It's not going to play with people who maybe voted for Trump. They wanted to see him fix the economy. And that's the thing, by the way, also that I think is really important too, is that, you know, he ran on fixing the economy. And a lot of why he won is because of that. And he said he's screwed the economy and he's doing things like, cracking down on free speech that is not the things people voted for. And this is classic overreach. Classic overreading the election, believing you have a mandate when you don't. And so again, my argument is just don't get out of his way. But at the same time, like explain that to rank and file Democrats. But I will say this about that point. I want to maybe finish up here. Rank and file Democrats are going to be pissed off if Schumer backs down, but they will get over it. They will get over it. I
yeah
guarantee you.
yeah
Okay. And a year from now, it will be forgotten because you're going to have an opportunity to vote against Trump if you're a Democrat. And believe me, this isn't about lone Democratic Party, right? We live in an era of negative polarization. What drives people's voting habits is not that they love their party, it's that they hate the other guy. And that isn't true for everybody, but it's true for a lot of voters. And I just think, and it's true for a lot of Republicans too. And that's where we are, and that's what Democrats need to remember.
yeah agreed. Well said.
Thank you. All right, Matt. Well, we'll end it there because I actually have to run to another meeting at 1. So, but this was great, man. Thanks
Yeah.
for joining us.
Yeah. So
And
thanks
I'm
for
gonna
thank you.
thank you for
Thanks for
those
having me. We'll be
the
happy to
few and
come
the
chat.
few of the proud who joined us today. And I'm gonna put this
Yeah.
up on the website so everyone can enjoy it and watch it. And let's do it again soon.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. I'll
All
talk
right,
to you
thanks,
soon.
man. Bye
Yeah.
bye.